Well, good morning, everyone, and to Bill, who's on Zoom. We can't see his face, but he is listening in. That's perfect. I'm going to call the joint work session of the City Council and the Redistricting Task Force to order. You can see my pretend gavel. First, I just wanted to say thank you to our Redistricting Task Force members, those of you that have already served and now have agreed to continue, and also to our new members. This is a very important process we're undertaking on behalf of the citizens of Fort Worth, and I have full confidence that at the end of this process, while there'll be a lot of labor involved, we'll be very proud of what we've done on behalf of the future of Fort Worth. We have a lot of esteemed members, but and a lot of you know each other already. But I thought what we'd do is first turn it over to Sal Espino, and then I think table tents are going around, but I think it's important we at least know who's who. So I'm going to start over with Michael Crane and just say who you are, and then those of you on the Redistricting Task Force, say who you are, and then maybe what you do professionally, what your affiliation is, so we kind of understand your community role here. Thank you.
Michael Crane, District 3, City Council.
Son, I think you're up next. Use that microphone, Osana. Yeah. Is the green light on?
There you go. Where it says push. Good morning, Osana Hermosillo, recovering 15-year City of Fort Worth employee, and happy to still serve in any capacity possible. I live in District 5 in East Fort Worth, and happy to be here.
Thanks, Osana.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor. I am Tony DeVito, representing District 7. I'm a realtor professionally, investor regularly, and returning task force member. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tony.
Good morning. I'm Jana Herrera. I am new to the Redistricting Task Force and happy to serve the city. I am a born and raised citizen of Fort Worth, and I am in Council 4, District 4 rather, and I'm involved in the heritage community, and I'm happy to be asked to serve. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm Graham Norris, District 3, and returning task member. I'm an attorney here in town.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Councilmember Jarrett Williams, representing the great district, District 6.
Well, you know, District 6 comes after District 5.
Hit that button there.
Yeah, District 6 comes after District 5, so that's who I represent, District 5. But my name is Bert Williams. I'm sort of a person who's just been involved with a lot of stuff. I was on the City Council for 10 years, Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Fort Worth, Bob Olin. And my business used to be being in the insurance business about 40 years. I've retired from that, so now I'm just trying to get my golf game going right. And so that's what I work on mostly now. But I was on the original task force, and I'm glad to serve again. And thanks for the appointment. Thank you.
Sal?
I'm Sal Espino, an attorney, former council member. I was an original member of the task force and happy to serve as chair of the task force and look forward to this process. Thank you for being here, and thanks everyone for watching out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Sal. Leonard?
Good morning. Leonard Firestone, City Councilman for District 7.
Elizabeth Beck, City Council person for District 9.
Chris Nettles, City Council person, District number 8.
Kent Bradshaw, I'm representing District 9. I'm an entrepreneur, and currently I'm building a farm outside of Fort Worth, Funky Town Farms, and it's going to have a youth development aspect to it. So that's the official announcement.
Congratulations to Kent. My name is Whitney Boyd, and I live in the great district, District 6, but serving on the task force, and I forgot the place number that was on there. But I work in higher education, so I get to work with some of the best and brightest students in the world every day.
Good morning. Councilmember Carlos Flores, representing District 2.
Carrie Moon, 4th, City Council, District 4.
Hit that button, Lucretia.
Go ahead. Thank you. Good morning. I'm Lucretia Powell. I'm here representing the task force on behalf of District 8. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucretia. And Mark, you can go ahead and introduce yourself since you're hiding out down there.
Good morning. Mark McAvoy, Director of Planning and Data Analytics, and you'll hear from me a couple of times later.
Awesome. And then city staff over here too, please introduce yourselves. Ron hates that. Melissa, you can go first. You need to introduce Ron.
Do I have to introduce Ron? I'm Melissa Bruner. I'm with the City Secretary's office.
I'm Ron Gonzalez with the City Secretary's office.
I'm Sarah Fullenwider, City Attorney.
Leann Guzman, Deputy City Attorney.
Fernando Costa, Assistant City Manager.
Thanks for indulging us. I think that's important that we all know who we are. There's a lot of great people around this table. I'm going to turn it now over to, yes. Oh, Bill, can you say hello?
Yes, I'm Bill Schur. I live in District 7. I'm an original member of the task force. I'm a retired attorney. I spent 17 years in the private practice of law in Fort Worth and 23 years with AT&T.
Thank you, Bill. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our chair, Sal Espino.
Again, good morning, buenos dias. You know, every 10 years we have the census and we have redistricting, and there are historic opportunities really that set in motion the boundaries for the next 10 years from which the citizens of Fort Worth elect representatives of their choice to represent them in the great city of Fort Worth. What is significant about this particular redistricting is for the first time ever, since Fort Worth went to single-member districts in 1977, we are going to 10 single-member districts. And this came about out of a charter amendment election in 2016, when Fort Worth voters voted to establish 10 single-member districts and electing members to those 10 districts, starting with the May 2023 elections. As we all know, Fort Worth has grown tremendously. You'll see later the census data. We're over 918,000 folks, from 741 in 2010, from 538 in 2000, from 447 before then. And so the city has grown, and also the diversity of the city has grown. So one of the, I guess, objectives or concerns I keep hearing from citizens is they want the maps to reflect both the geographical diversity and to give diverse communities an opportunity to select candidates of their choice. So we really have a council map and council representatives that reflect the rich heritage and diversity of the wonderful city that we call Fort Worth. When the task force was first constituted, we were charged with coming up with criteria for redistricting. You'll see those later today. And of course, the council as well is working and adopted that criteria that was recommended. And the council is also working on maps they will submit. So for citizens watching online, for everyone, we encourage everyone to submit maps to the task force, because this has been an open, public, transparent process. Redistricting software is available in training. We want the citizens to be part of this process as we move forward. And I thank everyone on the task force for giving up of your time to be a true, committed, engaged, volunteer citizen. And I thank the council for putting together the task force again as we embark on this important process known as redistricting. And let us set a standard of the way it's supposed to be done. Let us be the shining example in Texas and in the country how municipal governments really do redistricting in a way that involves the public, in a way that we in Fort Worth like to come together and build a map, come up with a map that makes Fort Worth citizens proud. Thank you very much.
Well said, Sal. And I think at this point, we're going to turn it over to Fernando Costa or to Mark McAvoy. Mark McAvoy, you're up.
There we go. Is that on? All right. Well, thank you, Mayor. And it's a pleasure to be here this morning, council members and redistricting task force members. I am happy to be with you this morning to talk a little bit about some of the 2020 census data and how it is going to impact the process under which you are working with the redistricting task force. And so what I'm going to do is just walk you through some information that may be helpful as you go through the process. Some of this, or most of this, I will say, that you have seen before in a variety of presentations that we've made either before City Council or going back to the early days of the redistricting task force last year, and there is some new information that is also incorporated. So as we start, and we look at the current makeup of the city council districts, the 8 districts that are currently constituted, and we look at the 2010 census data against the 2020 census data and the change, you can see that each of the districts as currently constituted changed by a significant percentage, with council district number 7 changing and growing by a 76% clip. And you'll see there, if we kept the 2020 boundaries in place for the upcoming redistricting and only had 8 council districts, the number would be approximately 115 per district. So as you go down the 2020 census numbers, you can see how some of them are semi-aligned with that number and some are not. So as you go through the process of mapping, you'll use the number plus or minus 5% to hit that target. It'll be a different target because we have 10 districts, but for this purpose, it's 115,000, so you can see the changes between 2010 and 2020. If we look at that from a race and ethnicity perspective, just now looking at the 2020 census count, you can see the total population grew by 24%, but if you look at that by the race and ethnicity markers of the population, you can see the differences in the different race and ethnicity groups that have grown at more or less rapid paces. And you can see that the fastest growing group by far is that other population, growing at 153%. And part of the reason why that is the case is because in the 2020 census, for the first time in the history of the census, people were allowed to select more than one race or ethnicity marker. So you saw the growth in that demographic as a result of that. But you can see the others changing as well. Black population growing by almost 30%, Hispanic and Latino by 27%, Asian population by 73%. And then the voting age population growing at a faster rate than the overall population. So the population is getting older as it grows larger. As you look at that trend going back to the 1990 census, you can see as the city is getting larger, as indicated by kind of the length of the bar, the various breakdowns of those demographics within that particular population count. So starting in 1990, going down to 2020, you can see that the population is getting more diverse as the population grows to its current, or its 2020 count number of 918,915. This is really instructive to look at spatially against maps, and you'll see as we go through the 1990 to the 2020 maps how this is changing. Excuse me, sorry. Thank you. So now that you can see the map, as we start in 1990 with a total population, as Mr. Espino mentioned before, of 447,000, these, and it may be hard to see the legend in the top right corner there, but the blue graphic in the map is greater than 50% Hispanic or Latino population. The orange is greater than 50% African American, and the yellow is greater than 50% minority, regardless of demographic. And so as you can see there, those 50% zones or areas, census tracts, are primarily concentrated in the middle of the city, inside of 820. There are a few on the south side that are south of that. Now watch what happens as we enter into 2000, and you see more diversity spread farther into different places in the city as the total population goes up. Now in 2010, it goes even farther out to the east and south. And now in 2020, you've got this very diverse population emerging in a variety of areas in the city that in 1990 was not there. And so as the total population has reached 918,915, you see this spread of diversity throughout and almost in every part of the city. As we look at the projected population growth between 2020 and 2045, this data is coming to us from the Council of Governments. And so currently, their estimate goes out to 2045. And if you look at the 5-year estimates beginning in 2025 and going to 2045, you'll see that the estimated population is 1.4 million, essentially. If you look at those geographic boundaries where the growth is projected, you can see in the periphery, particularly in north going around west to south, there are many areas where the projection is over 100% growth, right? So you still have the projection of heavy growth in those areas that kind of surround the city. And so you'd expect to see continued rapid growth there as we get into the 2030 census, the 2040 census, and beyond. So before we get to the next slide, I want to point out that as we presented this information in the last the last city council meeting, there was a request for some specific information on how certain trends were happening with the Hispanic and Latino demographic. And so the next 3 slides are going to present that information. The legal team that is here is going to get in more detail about this information in a later part of the presentation, but I'm going to present you the information as it is compiled right now. And so if we look at just the Hispanic or Latino population as it was counted in the 2020 census, you can see here that the total number is 319,836. And so as you look at the percentages in each of those census tracts, for the concentration, you can see right up 35 in the 820 area, down in the south part of town, just north of I-20, and east of downtown and 35. It kind of makes a reverse C and wraps around there for the highest concentration of that demographic. And so the more rose the color, the higher the concentration of the Hispanic or Latino population according to the 2020 census count. Now, as we move on and talk about the voting age population, so the total population is 319,000. The voting age population of the 2020 census count is 208,856. You can see a similar distribution, and that shouldn't surprise anybody. But if you'll notice, there is some change, especially in the north. So you see some changing color as you come north to south. But in general, the concentrations are the same. The heavy concentration are in those areas north 35, surrounding 820, in the south, west of 35, and just to the east. As we look at what voting registration data tells us through an analysis of Spanish surnames, and I want to point out before I present the slide that voter registration data does not record ethnicity or race, right? So when they do an analysis of Spanish surnames, that's what we're getting this data from. So the state of Texas is doing this analysis and producing a database from which we drew this number. And so if you look at the concentration of the places where you have a Spanish surname in voter registration, according to the 2020 census count, you can see again that it's in the same general areas where that population distribution is happening. And the total number that we have there is 90,613. And that's approximately 43%. So if you take the surname voter registration, apply it against the voting age population, that's a voter registration rate of about 43%. Another couple of things that I want to point out before we move on to the next piece of the presentation is that we were able to gauge, using this data, the voter turnout, or estimate the voter turnout in the last city council election. So for these census, or these voting tabulation districts, which is the geographic area that you're seeing, for those that were greater than 50% Hispanic or Latino based on the surname analysis, the total turnout in those geographic areas, those voting tabulation districts, was about 7%. That's the voter turnout for the 2021 City of Fort Worth election. Citywide, that same voter turnout essentially was 14%. And so just in these areas that we're seeing here, where you have a Spanish surname voter registration concentration of 50% or greater, the turnout, the total turnout, was about 7%. Yes, sir.
I know you're using Spanish surname voter registration, but I want the public to be clear. Not every Hispanic voter has a Spanish surname.
That's correct.
All right, I just want to point that out. Thank you.
That's a very important distinction. I believe that is the end of my portion of the presentation. So with that, if there are no other questions, if there are, I'll be happy to answer. If not, I'll invite Fernando Costa to talk about the redistricting procedures. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Mark. Good morning, Mayor, council members, task force members. I think it's fair to say that the current city council, including a new mayor and 5 of 8 new council members, have been listening carefully to many points of view about redistricting, including those who favored independent redistricting and models akin to independent, and those who favored the process that the former city council had instituted back in April before the election. And after listening carefully to all of those viewpoints, the current council just last month adopted 2 resolutions. One to reactivate the redistricting task force, appointing 7 of the original members who were able to continue, and in view of 4 who could not, appointing 4 new members to constitute an 11-member task force, and adopted a second resolution which amended the redistricting procedures that had originally been adopted by the City Council. And these new procedures are the ones that the task force will be following in the next few weeks. And we wanted to review those procedures with you because not everybody will have been familiar with them. We've already touched on a couple of points as shown in the gray shaded area. The council adopted those 2 resolutions back on October 19th, and a couple of weeks ago conducted a special work session to begin producing a proposed map by the council. In fact, the council spent roughly 4 hours and still did not complete that task to demonstrate the challenge associated with it. But we expect that the council will finish the task this afternoon at a 1 o'clock map drawing session. And that's depicted on the next line. We have today's joint work session and then the council map drawing session at 1 o'clock. The next milestone is a week from Friday, November 12th, which is the deadline for residents to submit their own proposed council district maps based on the 10 council districts that we'll be using for the May 2023 election. We still have additional training sessions whereby residents who are interested can learn how to use the redistricting software, and in a while we'll hear from Michelle Gutt about all of the communication and outreach efforts that we've made. I think this is a distinctive feature of the Fort Worth redistricting process. More than most communities, Fort Worth is committed to a participatory process, getting residents engaged, and the response, I think it's fair to say, has been quite satisfying. A large number of residents have engaged in the process and have begun to produce maps. Now, not everybody has been successful in producing a map that meets the criteria sufficient to submit for task force consideration, but many have, and we expect many more by November 12th to submit their maps. The first task force meeting will be November 17th, at which time we'll be able to brief the task force on all the maps that we've received from residents, from the City Council, and from staff. And the task force will be able to begin evaluating those maps, and we anticipate the task force will need at least one more meeting, which we've scheduled for December 2nd, to complete that evaluation, after which they would have a public hearing on December 8th at City Hall, and finally on Friday, December 10th, they would make a decision on selecting the initial map that will serve as the basis upon which the council will redraw council district boundaries. So that's a great deal of responsibility that the council has decided to delegate to the redistricting task force, and we're looking forward to the work of the task force, which will require a considerable amount of effort in a short period of time. Just in the period of a few weeks, we'll be asking the task force to complete a great deal of work. Then the chair of the task force, Mr. Espino, will be able to present the task force's initial map to the council at the first council work session in January, after which the council will conduct a public hearing on that initial map. And then we'll be able to proceed toward a map drawing session. If the council wishes to have more than one such session, they can, but at least one map drawing session January 18th to produce a proposed map, which could be an adjustment of the initial map, then hold 4 public hearings in locations around the city. Michelle Gutt is working now to determine suitable sites for those public hearings in cooperation with the council members. The idea is to have at least one hearing for every pair of adjacent council districts. Then the council would have a special work session on February 15th to produce a final map, which would be subject to adoption on February 22nd. That is a very fast timeline, but that's the timeline that the council has set. We think it's the timing is adequate, but it leaves very little room for delay. So a lot of work in a short period of time to get the work done and set the districts for the next election. Madam Mayor, I'd be happy to entertain any questions before we proceed to the next item.
Questions from anybody for Fernando? Whitney?
Great. If not, we turn the floor back
Whitney,
to
I
the
think
chair.
Whitney does have one.
Oh.
Yes,
I have a
McAvoy.
question.
Yes, please.
So you mentioned before citizens can submit the map, and if they don't meet the criteria, then their map isn't accepted. Like, is that
That's correct. The software will not allow a resident to submit a map unless it meets certain minimum criteria.
Okay, and does it tell them which criteria?
Yes, it'll tell you, yes, exactly which criterion is not being met, so you can go back and fix it.
Thank you.
It can be,
Yeah.
I think the council members will say from experience, it can be a tedious and frustrating process.
Fernando, for the sake of argument and since it's a public meeting, can you just give the brief criteria real quick?
Well, actually, that's a great introduction to Sal Espino.
Okay.
Chairman Espino. You can
here
stay right there.
Okay.
I'll be happy to answer for you.
All right, if we can go to the next slide. The council put together the original task force, and that task force recommended this redistricting criteria, which the council adopted. So obviously, number 1s through 5 are high priority. Each council district, under the one person, one vote legal principle, has to be of equal size, plus or minus 10%. So you start off with 918,000 folks divided by 10. So you're looking at 91,000 each council district under 10-1, plus or minus 10%. Then, of course, the maps must comply with the law, right? They must comply with the Constitution, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Texas Constitution, and I'm not going to steal Leann's thunder, but you can't pack diverse communities where you take away the opportunity of their community to elect the candidate of their choice. You can't fragment, which another term for that is cracking, that does the same thing. And then no retrogression. What that means is you don't want to make the diverse communities worse off than they were in the electoral process. Then number 3 is very important, and Leann is going to talk a little bit about what minority opportunity districts, there's a legal test for that, but you create minority districts in compliance with federal law to reflect the growing diversity of the city. Such districts in which African Americans, Hispanics, and other, I don't like the term minorities, I'll say other diverse communities collectively represent 50% or more of the voting age population are intended to create opportunities for fair representation. So the key here is you can't guarantee an electoral outcome, right? What you're trying to do is allow diverse communities to select a candidate of their choice. Well, for example, in District 2 for 12 years, from 93 to 2005, that district, which had a majority Hispanic population, elected Councilmember Jim Lane. And obviously in District 9, that has a majority Hispanic population. During the last several years, they've elected Wendy Davis, Joel Burns, and Zeta, and now Elizabeth Beck to represent them on the council. So electability is a function of many factors, including candidate qualification, appeal to voters, voting age population, voter registration, and voter participation. And then we want to obviously contain communities of interest. That's kind of a term of art. Community of interest is defined as a local population that has shared socio-economic characteristics and political institutions that would benefit from unified representation. So for example, in the North Side neighborhood where I was raised, that is a specific community of interest. And then you have Diamond Hill. And don't confuse the two. Diamond Hill and North Side are not the same thing. And there's another community that we call Far Greater North Side, and they all have their own rich history, so don't confuse those. And then they have to be contiguous. They have to be next to each other, all right? Next slide. And then without getting too technical, they have to be compact, and I'm not gonna get into what the Polsby-Popper ratio is. It just has to be greater than that number there, and you wanna have them compact. What you're trying to prevent here is gerrymandering. That's a term that comes back from the 1800s, where there was these districts for congressional purposes were kind of set up really badly, and so the term gerrymandering came into turn. Then we want to have identifiable geographic boundaries, streams, railroad tracks, highways. You don't want to split up a community by freeways, right? And to the extent possible, you want to have dwelling units that are located on opposite streets of the same residential streets to be in the same district. And then you want to contain whole voting precincts, whole census blocks or block groups. And this was very important. The citizens said, do not consider the place of residence of incumbents or potential candidates. Again, though, this is not only a legal exercise, it's a political exercise. So we want to produce maps that are fair to everybody, incumbents, candidates, and the public. So that's the adopted redistricting criteria that came out of the original task force that was adopted by the council. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Espino about criteria? If not, Leann Guzman, Deputy City Attorney, will talk with us about some legal considerations.
Well, I think Sal did most of my job for me, but I'll go ahead and stand up here and say at least a few things. I think most of you have probably heard most of this already, but we do have a few new faces. So I thought I would touch on some of the basics, which I think the most important, which Mr. Espino mentioned, was one person, one vote under the Voting Rights Act. And the main way that you meet that test is that the largest district can't be more than 10% bigger than the smallest district in total population. So as the maps are drawn, it's important to know where those high growth areas are that Mark McAvoy showed us earlier, because you're going to want those areas where we know growth will come to probably be smaller in population as much as you can within this 10% deviation to allow for that growth, because you know more people will be coming into that area. In the past, in fact, up through the last census cycle in 2010, DOJ pre-clearance was required for maps, and that is no longer required. So we will not be having to submit these maps to the Department of Justice. That's just no longer a requirement, which is both a blessing and a curse. The DOJ pre-clearance wasn't a guarantee that your map was legal, but it was at least you had the eyes of the federal government on it, and you kind of had a stamp of approval of some sort. But we will not have to do that process. So what we will need to do is adhere to the council-adopted criteria to the extent that we can. And I know that those of you that have drawn maps have seen, and if anybody watched the council map drawing session, you see how hard it can be to meet all those criteria all at once. So it's a balancing act. One of the most important things that we want to do is to obviously not discriminate on the basis of race or language minority status. And yet, the courts will say that you cannot use race as a predominant reason for drawing your districts. So it's, again, we're in that balancing act of making sure that we're not discriminating, but also not using race as a predominant reason for drawing a district. And this is even more difficult because we're not just tinkering with the districts we already have. We're not like Tarrant County, who somehow managed to come out even more balanced this year in their districts than they started out in 2010. I'm not sure how they accomplished that. But no, we're adding 2 additional districts, and so that does create a, this is not advancing. It's not advancing. I don't know if, anyway. That does create a bit more challenge because you're not just trying to change the population to try to even out what we already have. We're creating 2 whole new districts, which can really create a challenge. So do you want to try to see if this will work? I'll just keep talking while you're trying to. On my next slide, I have a great graphic if we get to see it. There we go. Thank you very much. On packing and cracking. And this is a question that we get a lot. And this is, okay, thank you. And this is a great graphic that shows how it can happen. And packing would be where you put too many minorities in one area that has the effect of diluting their voting power, and cracking is doing the opposite with the same effect. You spread out a group so that they can't elect a candidate of their choice. So one of the things that I wanted to, that I was asked to mention was the minority opportunity districts. So one of the exceptions to using race to create a district is the minority opportunity district. And it's a 3-part test that we would have to meet. And the first one is that the group is sufficient in number and compact enough to create a district. Courts have struck down minority opportunity districts because they were so gerrymandered, and the district is just this crazy shape that is nowhere near compact, because they said, no, you were so clearly using race as a predominant reason to get this crazy shape. The group was not compact enough, and it failed the test. So it has to be compact with a sufficient number of this one particular minority that you're trying to create the district for. They have to vote in a politically cohesive way. Not, for example, this was one of the examples that our outside counsel gave me, not all Hispanics vote cohesively. So you have to make sure that the group that you are creating a minority opportunity district for actually does vote cohesively. And then you also have to make sure that there's an issue with polarized voting between that minority group and a majority group. So for instance, I know that Mr. Espino alluded to some of the past races, district races, where a candidate was selected by a minority group but was not a member of that minority group. That's not necessarily the goal of creating a minority opportunity district. It doesn't necessarily mean that the candidate will be a particular race. It just means, can that group put into office the candidate of their choice? The candidate doesn't have to be any certain race, just is it their choice? So that kind of gives you the overview, and I put this great legal term up here, totality of the circumstances. This is something that courts will look at, and it's something that I encourage you all to do as you're making your maps, whether you're in the public making your maps, or those of you and on council who have done that, and then the task force that's going to choose a map. Look at the totality of the circumstances. We're not trying to make sure there's a certain number of majority-minority districts, because courts have struck that down if that's all you're looking at in your map is majority-minority districts, because that's using race as a predominant factor. So use all of the criteria to the extent that you can as you're looking at these maps, and make sure they meet as many of the criteria as possible. And as we move forward through the process, we will have our outside counsel engaged in an even more active manner to make sure that we're on the right side of the law as we move forward. But if you have any questions before I sit down, I'll try to answer them. Yes?
Not so much a question as with respect to totality of the circumstances. Just wanted to point out historically, so the public and members of the task force, the council know, Fort Worth went to single-member districts in 1977. So District 2 is the only council district where the candidate of choice from that community has been Hispanic. From 77 to 91, it was Councilmember Louis Zapata. From 93 to 2005, it was Councilmember Jim Lane, who was not Hispanic. Then from 2005 to 2017, yours truly, Sal Espino. And then from 2017 to the present, Carlos Flores. And the way it's worked out in the city of Fort Worth, traditionally districts 5 and 8, the candidate of their choice in that community, they've elected African Americans, and now recently District 6. So we do have a record number of African American candidates on the city council. and we saw the population growth. There was growth in the African American community, as well as Hispanic community, Asian population, and other. Just in looking at the totality of circumstances, as Fort Worth has become more diverse, certain groups continue to do well at the ballot box and are elected, and you can see that reflected by the growing diversity of this council. And the hope is that as we go to 10-1, that diversity continues. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So how do you objectively determine if a group is voting cohesively or not? That seems to be kind of a subjective criteria to
Yeah, so that's part of what we've done in pulling the Hispanic surname, which of course is not a perfect method because the converse is also true to what Mr. Espino said. You can have a Hispanic last name, like me, my married name, and not, obviously, I may fall in that category, but I'm no help. That's not going to help you to know. So, but that is a tool that's used to look at how the Hispanic surnames are registering to vote in the primaries to see if you can ascertain some of that voting behavior. Because we don't have, obviously, to the point, we don't have how everybody votes, right? That's not available information. So we use what tools we have, and that is one thing that we have.
So, I mean, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I have it right. So if you have a potential minority opportunity district and their vote is split down the middle, they don't vote cohesively, then that cannot be considered a minority opportunity district.
It would be difficult to create one. That's correct, because you might get a large enough number of people of a particular minority group, but even if you put the entire group together, they couldn't elect. They would not agree on a candidate of choice, if that makes sense. And the goal would be to find that political cohesiveness in order to get them together in one district.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I guess one of the main reasons that I agreed to serve on this committee was the fact that my basic concern is what's good for the city of Fort Worth. That's the main thing I'm concerned about. When we have the numbers, then I would like to make sure that when we draw the map will indicate the numbers. Now, whether a person votes for a certain person or not, I'm really not concerned about who they vote for. I am concerned about they have the privilege to vote for whomever they want. I don't want to see us draw maps that's going to gerrymander any particular person. I am the victim of that with my representative for the Congress. I was gerrymandered out of being able to vote for the persons that we wanted to vote. And so my concern here is to make sure that we do not try to say that this person is going to vote for this person. That, to me, is not. My thing is giving that individual the opportunity to vote. And whomever that person decides to vote for, that's their business. But I want to make sure the numbers are there and that we do not do the packing and cracking, but we actually put the people in a position where they can vote. And hopefully we will arrange for them to be able to be with consistency in regards to the people that are with them. And hopefully we can come out of this with 10 districts that will be fair and that will have the diversity that we know is here, and we see the numbers. Those numbers should indicate to us the 10 districts, and also should indicate to us that we're going to put people that are alike, that have the same motives and things like that together, whereas they would have an opportunity to vote for the person or persons that they want to vote for.
Yes, I think you've articulated the Voting Rights Act perfectly. I think that's exactly the goal.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Any other questions for Leann?
I guess my question, and it may be more for the council, like, I understand that we are going to propose the map, but they actually get the vote. So in order to, I guess, align with like the Race and Culture Task Force and what I hear a lot from communities that I sit in, specifically more Black and brown communities, is wanting to have those opportunities with what the gentleman was just saying. And you also mentioned the legal aspect of that. So how do you encourage us to find the balance between to where we can create those opportunities in a holistic way that allows the people to have what they're asking for and looking for?
Yeah, I think it's a delicate balancing act, right? I mean, that's what I alluded to earlier. So it's going to be a lot of using the data. So we're going to lean on Mark McAvoy to show you guys everything that you need to know in order to try to create that balance that Mr. Williams was talking about, to try to create it where there is no discrimination, there is no retrogression, which are on our list of criteria. So that's not a perfect answer for you, but it at least steers you in the right direction that we're going to have to look at the data very closely in order to do that.
Any other questions for Leann? No. Thank you, Leann, very much. I think we're moving now to Michelle Swindle.
Well, there we go. Good morning. My name is Michelle Swindle. I'm the IT manager for GIS and public safety applications. At the last task force meeting, council member meeting, working session, there we go. We reviewed maps that were presented by the council members. This is the updated version by Councilmember Williams. And at the last meeting, his numbers didn't align to meet the 10% criteria, and they've been adjusted accordingly. Then we have the three that were presented, updated by Councilmember Moon, the bluebonnet, the armadillo, and the mockingbird. And
So that's the state flower, the state bird, and what's the armadillo carry? The state what? The state rodent. We have a state rodent. I make no judgment about the desirability of that map with a state rodent.
So comparing the different maps, the two that were the most cohesive were between Councilmember Williams and the bluebonnet map. So we created a commonality map. So everything that's in color is aligned between the two maps, is identical. And then everything in gray is all the differences. And so across all four maps, there was a lot of commonality. And then looking exclusively at bluebonnet and Williams map is where you see the differences. This also takes into account keeping the, wrong one. This is a staff map that takes all the commonalities and the commonalities of other ones meeting the additional criteria, such as keeping the Riverside Alliance community intact, as they requested via letter. It also places Garden of Eden in District 5, as requested at the last session. It does satisfy all of the adopted criteria. The caveat to that in maximizing compactness, there is one district, District 3, that falls slightly outside of the Polsby-Popper 0.05 as the ideal ratio at 0.04. Staff was still trying to adjust to get closer to the 0.5, but that didn't make it in time for this meeting.
Can I ask a question about
Of course.
specific district? Is it even possible to get there with the layout of our city boundaries? I know that's one of our criteria, but when I look at what is City of Fort Worth and what isn't, I imagine however we cut that district up is going to be very, very difficult to reach that score.
That is a fantastic question. Of the, I think there have been 10 total maps that have been submitted. None have fully met the criteria. Staff is working to try and get there, but the additional caveat that is in the criteria is it says if it doesn't meet the 0.5 target, then just a justification why. And the justification is because of the cattywampus shape of District 3. So.
And ACM Costa just said it's almost impossible to, knowing that district, because it's my district, there are lots of the other criteria that was set out by the task force was communities of interest.
Correct.
And a lot of those have registered as community of interest in that sort of general area. So that's something else that the task force will have to look at as part of that too.
Yes, exactly. And just for transparency, within the mapping application, there are 2 subsections, one that is communities of interest adjusted and one that's communities of interest original. Some of the communities overlapped, like the HOA itself registered, as well as the Alliance, as well as the Greater Alliance. So to streamline those and have less confusion, we combine them into a single area. So you can always turn on what the original intent was to compare the differences as you're breaking up, because some of them, just the nature of the beast, they're going to have to be divided in some way. And the last point of this was that the difference between the largest and smallest was 7,279 people. Were there any questions? Yes?
What district is the Riverside Alliance in this merged map? Or can you point to it, I guess? I mean, I know you don't.
It's all right here.
So, all right. So it's east of 35, and it goes, I guess that's that looks sort of like the current District 4 that starts on the east side, does an L, and goes up north of 820, right?
Correct.
All right. And then the second question is, I know the council's still going to work on these maps later today. Do you have the demographic data for these districts, or still working on it, or?
We have demographic data. It's not in the slide deck, but that can be provided.
All right. And I know council's still working on the map, so thank you.
I think that was it, yeah. Did y'all have any additional questions for me about the maps?
Yeah, I was going to ask, so I think in the past, did the staff, city staff created a map as well? Is that going to continue to happen, or am I correct in that? They did. Okay.
Staff will produce a recommended map for the task force to consider, along with the map from the council, along with the various maps from residents.
Okay. And do all the maps, do we know who created them? Will we know?
We will identify the resident or the civic organization who submitted the map.
Okay. And the final question is, do the maps come with any other additional information of like, this is our thinking on this, this is why we did this, or is it just the map?
Some of them have. There's a description box, and specifically the Citizens for an Independent Redistricting, I think that I got that name right. They have 2 versions that they submitted, a Compact A and a Compact B, and they gave justification for their Compact B that it was similar to A, but it additionally took into account Bonnie Bray and I think Oakhurst to keep them intact. So some people do provide additional information, but it's not required. Anything else for me?
Just one last point, so the public is clear. Riverside right now is split into, there's elements of Riverside in Districts 4, 9, and 8, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Michelle?
Yes, sir?
I think just a takeaway, just hearing some of the feedback from the members, is to include in each map the supermajority minority areas, the majority minority areas, and then the minority opportunity districts for each map. And that might help further distinguish map from map.
Yeah, and we can overlay those and, yep.
Just provide the numbers.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you.
I'm going to give you a quick update on community outreach and the software training that we've been doing. So the community outreach, we've done a total of 23 different stories on redistricting that we've shared through our city news, which is our electronic newsletter, which goes to right now about 60,000 subscribers that we have. We've also shared that information on social media and Nextdoor. In addition to sharing it through city news, we have specialized bulletins that go to all of our neighborhood associations and also our faith-based organizations, and so we've shared it with them. We also set up a special topic in our email subscription just for people who wanted to know about redistricting, and we have about 5,000 subscribers to that, and so we've shared the information with them. We also created a web page during the task force work. We set up the web page, and we've been adding and updating that as we've gone along. It will also, starting this week, be the repository for all of the maps that are being submitted. So all of those will be posted online. Anyone who submits a map, that will be available to the public. This summer, we also held 5 open houses, and at the open houses, we had computers available, and we had staff to provide information on redistricting and the software, and we also held 10 town hall meetings in each of the council districts. We've also had great partnership with the media. The Fort Worth Report and the Star-Telegram have had reporters covering the topic of redistricting, but also coming to the training and actually learning how to use the software and participating in the training process, so that was real helpful. We also had coverage through the Dallas Morning News, the opinion piece. That was my favorite headline, Fort Worth Schools Dallas when it comes to redistricting. Communities of interest were mentioned. We did outreach with a lot of the different community organizations and neighborhoods that we work with on a regular basis to encourage them to identify themselves as communities of interest. This was self-identification. As was mentioned, we had about 120 original registrations for communities of interest. Once those were looked at and we took into consideration the overlaps, some that really didn't qualify. For example, we had one person who said that an entire zip code was a community of interest, so those we had to make some adjustments. We ended up with a total of 77 in that adjusted layer. And when people go in and use the software, that is one of the layers that is in the GIS system that will identify the communities of interest. And then the software training. We've had 2 phases. The first phase, as you probably remember, was before we had the census data available. So that was just to get people used to the software and get them trained on it. We had 54 people who were at our in-person training, and we also had an online training video that people were able to view. We had handouts available, and we also had an email set up for people to ask questions. Phase 2 was the training that we're doing right now, which is once we had the new census data, we set up 9 basic training sessions, and then we also had 5 advanced training and collaboration sessions so that people who were comfortable with the software could come in and get some advanced training help, but also it was open to people who maybe weren't comfortable using the software but wanted to participate, so they could come in and work with people who were comfortable with the software to develop maps. And we did 5 of those advanced collaboration sessions. Total, we've had so far over 100 people who've participated in the in-person training, and over 220 people have watched the online training video that we have available. We've also set up some special sessions for organizations. We have Leadership Fort Worth going through training this week and developing maps, and we've also been working with the AKA a sorority. They set up a group, and we had them come participate. So we have 4 more training sessions that we'll be having, and then we'll be ready to start accepting all the maps and getting them posted after the November 12th deadline. Are there any questions?
Michelle?
Thank you, Michelle.
I have a question over here for you.
Yes.
Talking about communities of interest specific to the Hispanic community, You mentioned outreach efforts to those communities of interest. Specifically, can you detail for us what efforts you've made to make Hispanic outreach?
Well, all the information that we shared with our neighborhood associations, which we always do, it was available in English and Spanish. And we shared the organization. I'm trying to remember, the woman came to our training session, and she represented several Hispanic organizations, and she shared the information. I don't have the list of all of the organizations that we did the outreach to through the bulletin, but I can get that to you.
Yeah,
But,
please. Yeah, I'd be curious to see that person that you mentioned and what organizations she may represent. You mentioned media.
Yes.
Translations, that's a given. What about Spanish media? I mean, we have collaborative partners like NBC5 that, does it, with Spanish media, but specific to the city's efforts, have we made any outreach to Spanish media?
Yes, we have. And we had coverage with Univision. They did some special outreach. They did that during the task force work, but then they've also continued with the training. And they actually attended one of our training sessions as well. And we also translated the information, the cheat sheet that you can use when you do the redistricting training. We also translated all of that into Spanish and shared that.
Okay, and then final question. As far as available help, technical support at the training sessions, is there anyone that can speak Spanish and is proficient on software?
What we did is on the registration information, we asked if someone needed translation help, and we do have a staff member who's available to attend the training and also to help with the hotline that we set up if we get any questions in Spanish. So we do have a staff support person who can assist with the translation. We have not had any requests for the training in Spanish.
All right. Thank you. And I would suggest that if it's not available, and I can't remember if it is there the Spanish translated version online on the city
Yes.
website? Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
And so to wrap up here, I believe I just have one slide, but as you heard Michelle mention, we've had over 300 touches with the training material, whether that's an in-person training or someone accessing the online material. And so thus far, we have 3 submitted maps that have been produced that have been validated at that minimum level that Fernando mentioned earlier. And this isn't advancing, so you can't see those, but I believe you have those in front of you. And as you can see, as you look at each of those maps, that there are some distinct differences. So it is possible to submit a map that meets the validation criteria that is not exactly or materially the same as another map. And so what we're expecting to see as we move through November 17th or November 12th, which is the deadline. There we go. Thank you. Got it. Thank you. And so as you can see, the 3 that have been submitted to date have been submitted by resident John Davis, and then 2 by the Citizens for Independent Redistricting, a Compact Plan A and a Compact Plan B. And so it's my understanding that 2 additional maps have been submitted. They were submitted after we put the presentation together. So as it stands right now, we have 5 submitted maps from residents that have met the minimum criteria, and we would expect to see some more between now and November 12th, and as we prepare those for submission to the task force. So that is the last slide that I have for you. I'll be happy to answer any questions about this material or even going back to the census information that we talked about earlier, but that is our last prepared slide. So I want to thank you for the opportunity. And Fernando, do you have any closing comments, or is that it? I got the thumbs up, so that's it.
Awesome.
And you'll provide the demographic information with all these maps, right?
Yes, sir. That is a piece of information that we will be happy to provide.
Wonderful. And with that, if there's no more questions for staff, I don't have anything right now. Looks like you've got the redistricting schedule on your calendars. Anybody have any issues with that schedule-wise? You've got what you need? I know you're all very busy. Okay.
I just want
Go
to make a comment. I'll make a comment. I think I speak for the rest of my council colleagues to say we want this to be a fair, open, and transparent process that involves the community citizens so they all feel included in it. And represented by this council. I think we all want to know that we represent our citizens out there, and so I'll say that from that. And a couple times too, we hit on this, and my council colleagues are going to see me as a broken record. But again, I think whatever maps are drawn, and I hope we put as much diligence as we have in the redistricting process into getting voter turnout and voter participation in future elections. So with that, I just turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Michael. Anybody else? Go ahead, Sal.
I want to reiterate what Task Force member and former council member Burt Williams said about we want what's best for the city of Fort Worth. And so I think that's the underlying principle throughout this redistricting process. And I do want to commend staff, especially on making the software available. This was done even early during the initial convening of the original task force where we were looking at criteria. I mean, that was unprecedented. We even had an online Spanish language public hearing. So I think this is unprecedented for the level of outreach, and we'll continue that. And so at the end of the day, I would also throw this out. We can draw a map that's legal, but I think we also need to consider, is the map also fair and equitable? So in addition to the legal requirements, we need to also consider, are the maps fair and equitable? Thank you.
Thank you, Sal.
And a quick question. When might we expect to receive that additional backup data just so we can start to further study the maps that have been submitted thus far?
Good question from Mark and your team. What do you think is reasonable if you get maps as late as the 12th and you're going to brief the task force on the 17th? Maybe start with current and then we can talk about new submissions.
So for the ones that have already been submitted, we've done a kind of cheat sheet like we had at the task force meeting. So those can be available by probably end of day tomorrow. For the other ones, they'll definitely be available by the task force meeting.
Okay. And who can the task force, maybe the main point of contact? Will that remain Fernando or somebody, or Mark? So they kind of know who to expect emails from?
You can send communications to me. I'll make sure the appropriate staff responds.
Okay, perfect. Carrie?
I'll also encourage members of the board to make sure they've signed into their own portal and establish a user ID, and then you can go to Open File, go to the Shared Plans, and view the data there.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else? Wonderful. Thank you all so much for being here today. Council, we have to book it back over, correct? So try to be quick. Sorry. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.